Hi everyone, Happy New Year from the EAS to all. It will be such an excellent start of 2023 with Rebecca Lahl presenting the webinar How to Prepare a Policy Brief. Rebecca Lahl, she is the head of the Office for Knowledge Exchange at Leibniz Centre for Tropical Marine Research in Bremen, short ZMT. Rebecca is supporting stakeholder engagement and knowledge and technology transfer at ZMT. As a knowledge broker and trainer, she supports science to society and science to policy process, knowledge transfer, and transdisciplinarity. Rebecca holds an BSc in environmental science and MSc in natural resource management. Before joining ZMT, she has worked in development, cooperation, and as a political advisor. My name is Anna Viskovic, and today I will moderate this webinar. This webinar will last for approximately 45 minutes, with 30 minutes of presentation and 15 minutes for the Q&A. Rebecca, many thanks for joining us today. The floor is yours, and you can start presenting your presentation.
Thank you, Anna. It's a pleasure to be here. Nice to meet you, everybody. I'm just about to share my screen now. So today I want to give you a bit of guidance on how to prepare a policy brief. So what I'm going to tell you is taken from various sources. There are a lot of resources out there, but it's also a bit of experience from our ZMT policy brief series and my personal experience as working as a policy advisor before I worked at ZMT in my life as a knowledge broker. So I've given this presentation for quite a couple of times, and it gets me in a bit of a dilemma because I will tell you a lot about how you can do things, what you shouldn't do, and all the things that you can need to consider. But I really want to encourage you to still do a policy brief, try to write a policy brief, because it is very rewarding and you will grow in it trying to write a policy brief, and practice will improve our skills in science communication. But let's start with a easy question. What is a policy brief? It is a very concise document of usually 2 to 4 pages or more that sums up your research in 6 bullet points, but it's generally a very open format. I have seen policy briefs which are also 20 pages long with a lot of text or a lot of pictures. They do have some commonalities that I will get to in a bit. They all present a concise summary of information that can help the reader to understand and also likely make better decisions, especially on government policies, and also has can provide an objective summary of relevant research, suggest possible policy options, or go even further and argue for a particular course of action, so advocate for a particular course of action. At ZMT, we do have a policy brief series since 2016, and we usually aim for about 5 policy briefs annually, but it depends on do we have enough content for a policy brief? Are there motivated individuals who want to write a policy brief? And do we all have enough capacities to do so? The ZMT policy brief series we use to illustrate the high practical and political relevance of our research. And also, sorry about that, it was just my doorbell rang. We use it to develop recommendations for environmental policy and sustainable development. So I'm editing this policy brief series. That means I'm drafting the text, I'm doing the layout, and I also take over the dissemination of the policy brief. Let us reflect a little bit about why we should write a policy brief. There are many good reasons for us to write a policy brief. It can contribute to making research effective for policy and society. It can contribute to closing knowledge gaps. It can make research more visible and also the value of research more visible. It may help you to become a better communicator. which can also help you to qualify for work outside academia. And yeah, I think it's fun. And there are also a couple of advantages for the recipients, for the decision makers. So in ideal case, they have a higher capacity to make decisions and make evidence-based decisions. So yeah, looking at these reasons, I sometimes think there are even more advantages for you as a scientist to write such a document. But let's look into how to prepare a policy brief. I tried to distill 6 main points today. So I think the first most important thing to do is to define a purpose of this policy brief, to reflect on what you want your recipients to do, what you want them to change, a key message that you want to transmit, and you will keep coming back to this purpose in the writing process. Then I invite you to research and understand your audience. I think many of us as scientists don't have a clue how the policy process works and what the everyday life of a policymaker looks like. And it really is worth the while to better understand who this document is for and what their preferences are. What I also can recommend is to cooperate, especially if you're an early career scientist. It can be very helpful to ask colleagues, other experts to join the endeavor to write a policy brief or collaborate with knowledge brokers. I've made the experience that many colleagues are very thankful that someone is approaching them to write a policy brief and is doing all the coordination work with the writing process. What I can't stress enough is to make the policy brief relevant to the audience. So always explain why it is relevant for policy, economy, and for people. The final act of a policy brief is to deliver it, to connect to the audience and disseminate your policy brief in the right ways at the right time and also to the right audience. There's also what I will close today. I will close and also tell you a bit about how to put effort into structure and style of a policy brief. Let's talk a bit about the purpose and the key message. So it is essential to have a clear and simple message that you reiterate. A policy brief should inform readers of a particular issue. It suggests possible policy options and make recommendations. So you can be upfront about your purpose from the start and maintain focus on your own objectives and link every paragraph back to this purpose. So convincing policy brief communicates the urgency of the issue and focuses on the benefit and advantages of following your policy advice. The intention of a policy brief is often to solve a specific problem, so why not stay focused on this? My tip would be to write down this purpose on a piece of paper and put it in front of you, refer to it often, and just keep coming back to it to ensure that everything that you write serves that purpose. When you reflect about the purpose of a policy brief, it's good to know that there are generally 2 types of policy briefs. One is the advocacy brief that argues in favor of a particular course of action, but there's also the option of an objective brief that is more about informing and gives balanced information about an issue for the policymaker, and they can make up his or her own mind. As I mentioned before, to look into your target audience and to understand them a bit better can only improve your policy brief. So you may ask yourself, who's actually a policymaker or who is my target audience? So let's look a little bit more closely into this very diverse group. What are decision makers? So there can be politicians on local, regional, or international level, but also other officials. Other recipients may be policy analysts, development practitioners, donors, ecosystem users or managers, but also community leaders, and of course also industry. So what can be helpful is to ask yourself, who will actually implement the action or the change that you ask for, or who may be able to broker your message or support you in brokering your message. What I like to do to identify the audience is that I ask my partners or colleagues about the relevant decision makers. So who is it and how can I approach them, especially since we are an institute that is based in Germany and exclusively works in the tropics. For us, it's really important to understand local conditions and context. I also like to compile a mailing list for the policy brief, and I would research my audience online. So I would look up official government websites and just look how they are organized, the different departments, and who may be responsible. But I could also, sometimes I also refer to ResearchGate or LinkedIn or Facebook, depending also on where I can find them on these social networks, and just get a better understanding of who I could send this policy brief to. As mentioned, I can invite you only to cooperate with others. With partners, the policy brief can gain more visibility and legitimacy, can help you support identification of target groups and policy processes. It will improve the quality. It can incite interest and improve the outreach. Of course, it's a little bit more coordination with more authors, but I think it's worth a while. So working with other experts. I mean, there's also the option, and I will get to that later on again, to co-produce a policy brief together with policymakers or policy close organizations or individuals. Or you can also consider working very closely with other actors, such as from media or from environmental NGOs. It's important that you acknowledge your partners. So we always include logos of our partners on the policy briefs. How do you make a policy brief relevant to your audience? I think it's important to contextualize. So even if you know what the problem is and why it is relevant, it is important to state it again and explain it in detail, and also highlight why it's relevant to people and not only why it's interesting or relevant for science. It's important to focus on meanings and not on methods. So the readers are very much interested in what you found and what you recommend, and they don't need to know every details of methods. I've made good experience in telling a narrative, making the text personal, to be empathetic. So it can be very helpful both in the writing process and also in dissemination to put yourself in the shoes of your audience and maybe think about what they could gain from what you're proposing and how it could affect their everyday life. It's important to relate to the big picture. So even if the policy brief may build on context-specific findings, it should always draw conclusions that are more generally applicable and relate to the big picture. I wanted to talk about how to deliver or how to disseminate a policy brief and talk a little bit about the experience that we made at ZMT. So what I usually do is that I prepare a short social media post for LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Here you can see an example of this picture that we shared online. So it provides a little bit of background information. It contains a key message and the topic. Here it's about social participation in coastal and ocean management in Brazil. And then I will share it on these different channels. I'll also have a short email in English and also the local language, and disseminate the email with the download link to this mailing list. We'll also include a DOI in the policy brief, and I'm uploading it to ResearchGate. I think it's also a nice way to have it as part of in the science community. And if possible, my recommendation would also to link it with an event such as a webinar, or a nice idea would also be to have, for example, a panel discussion and you invite policymakers to discuss the results of your policy brief. I think this is a nice way to gain more attraction. Yeah, so try thinking about the policy brief like a pizza. You would like to deliver it to the right audience. So the one, who's hungry and in the right ways and at the right time. And an excellent policy brief does not have an impact if it's not delivered. So just uploading it online won't make a difference. So we talked a little bit about how to identify the audience and also how one can disseminate a policy brief. But I also wanted to talk about the right time. And I think that is really difficult for us because we don't, most of us are scientists and we don't have a clue about policy processes, the policy cycles. So and both, these the cycles of policy and the granting scheme, they are not very much aligned. But what we are trying to find is a window of opportunity or a policy window. There's a nice model by Kingdon, which suggests that there are generally three streams. One, which is the problem streams, where problems are identified. Let's say, for example, plastic pollution or marine litter. And then there's the proposals or solution stream. This is the stream where the solutions get formed. So let's say, for example, a ban on plastic bags. And then you have this political stream where there are, for example, events such as, let's say, a G8 meeting. So when all these three streams intersect in this model, you have this policy window and a window of change. There's also this model by James E. Anderson about the policy cycle. You'll find many adaptation about this policy cycle in different publications, but I wanted to show you this. It's an ideal process, it's a rule of thumb, but it's not really how in reality policy is created, but yet it helps me to understand that there's usually a phase of problem definition or agenda setting, and then there's a process of where we design policies to address the problems identified, and then there's some policy implementation and then evaluation, and then we start off again with the agenda setting process. So a policy brief could, for example, help to create awareness of an issue and help with the problem definition, but it could also provide information for concrete policy designs or help with the evaluation of policy. So let's talk a little bit about the structure and style of a policy brief. At ZMT, we do have a structure that we follow with every policy brief, but in general there's no one-size-fits-all approach to writing policy briefs because the topics and audience may vary with each policy brief. Effective policy briefs tend to contain the same elements and have similar structures. So there's usually always an interesting title, and there's an executive summary. We do have in our policy brief series a section on context, and then one about research results, and a whole page on policy recommendation. And I think the issue about policy briefs is that the policy recommendation should be the main focus during the writing process, but it's at the same time maybe the aspect that we don't have a lot of experience with. I think the first page is the most important page because policymakers tend to have not a lot of time and they might skip everything else and scroll right through to your recommendations. So how we designed our policy brief, that we have an executive summary that provides the whole overview of the problem, its political relevance, key research results, and also key policy recommendations. And it's all on this first page, and they all relate or come back to the purpose of the policy brief. If you're interested to know more about how to put effort into a good title, I can also recommend a resource by the FAO. It's the Food Security Communications Toolkit. It's quite interesting. Here I copied out some examples of titles and a comment and accompanying comments. So a good way for a title can be to work with a title and a subtitle on interesting, relevant question that incites interest and lures the reader to read further. But also short titles with that incite interest can be a good way of it to have a nice title. We have a whole page of with a context section, and this is, I think, very important. It puts the research into context, so it provides additional information. It's not about describing the study side and the methods that were used, but really about describing social, environmental, or the practical problem, and also the political and legal relevance. So it delivers the essential facts that convinces the audience that the problem requires attention and action. So yeah, again, you wouldn't go into detail about methods, but rather include more of socioeconomic information. So what does that really mean for politics and society? Why is it relevant? We do have a page about where we showcase what we did in our research. It's called Research Results, so it illustrates and summarizes the results in short sections that are complemented by strong, meaningful figures and boxes. But it's important that these results lead to the policy recommendations in the subsequent section for creating a coherent argument. I recommend to break up the text in short paragraphs and also shorter sentences than that we are used to, have strong and meaningful, relevant, simple figures and boxes. And also compared to other publication formats, you're very free to use colors, boxes, and bold text. I wanted to show you this 2 pages as part of a policy brief that we published in 21. What I like about this policy brief are 2 things. First of all, it's a comparatively dry topic. So it's about data sharing for decision making in the Western Indian Ocean region. And what we did here to increase the readability of the policy brief is that we worked with icons that are Creative Commons to structure the recommendation and make them more readable. And what I also like about this policy brief is it was co-authored by 2 scientific institutes that we are working with from the region, and also with the Science Association of the Western Indian Ocean region, an environmental NGO, Cordio, but also the Secretariat of the Nairobi Convention, which is the environmental program of UNEP in the Western Indian Ocean region. So it can be a strategic way also to first of all check back, is that really relevant, but or frame the policy brief that it's adapted to the target audience, and also increase the likelihood that it's being uptaken, for example, at the next conference of parties meeting, for example, in technical background documents also. So I think that's a good example on what I said about cooperating with others. So how a couple of recommendations on how to frame policy recommendations. I think it's important to make them realistic. So it needs to be a recommendation that are politically, economically, and socially and technically feasible. They need to be easy to find. So put them in boldface, put them in a box called recommendations. As mentioned, many readers might skip straight to the recommendation. I think a clear, short wording that is easy to understand is very important, and it's good not to overwhelm the reader with a long list of recommendations. Usually 5 to 6 recommendations are enough. If there are more, then you could try to combine them or consider writing a separate policy brief. It's important that they flow logically from the evidence presented. Wanted to give you an example of what I think are good policy recommendations and maybe something that can be improved. What I like, one recommendation is harmonize legislation on data sharing in the wider region. I think it's very clear on what needs to be done, and then there's a paragraph below that explaining in more detail what we expect the policy actors to do. I also would recommend something like anti-fouling champagne should be banned to use, and then in the subsequent section you could explain it in more detail. Recommendations such as develop social ecological models for reservoir management, maybe not ideal, because on the one hand, models has different meanings, both in science and policy. And also it's a recommendation that it's not really clear what kind of models you want to develop. Is it a scientific model or is it a model for management? So that can be improved in my opinion. Generally, I would recommend to avoid jargon and specialized words, make it easy to understand, because most policymakers are generalists and not experts, and they don't have time to look up words. If they are really interested in the topic, they will read more. You can reference your publication for further reading. So it's helpful to ask yourself if a layperson can understand it, or ask a not work-related friend if he or her is able to understand it. I wanted to quickly talk about a couple of challenges that we sometimes encounter. It's about being aware of expectations of a policy brief. I don't think it's will you change the world with a policy brief? That's not likely. Will you be able to contribute to discourses? Maybe. Will you work for the bin? That's actually likely that it's not. That it's not. They will not have the impact that you may be anticipating. It's also, as mentioned before, a little bit of a challenge that we lack knowledge about how to give policy recommendations, because we lack knowledge about the policy process and governance, and also we simply often don't know what a decision maker really needs or wants to know. So a solution could be to involve policymakers early on, or have additional discussions, or even consider them as co-authors if it's possible. Challenging is also the monitoring of impact. I'll just give you an example on the next slide, but it's really difficult to see what this piece of paper, if it really made a change or not. I also would encourage you to be very aware of controversies and use wording. Don't make statements or recommendations without scientific evidence. If you're not unsure, or if you're unsure, if you have a public relation office, it can be helpful to check back with them. What we also use at ZMT is a disclaimer, which states this policy recommendations do not necessarily reflect the views of ZMT or its partners. So I see I have about 2 or 3 minutes left, so I'll spend the last minutes about talking about monitoring impact. This is really difficult for me. We don't have the ability to check to see how many downloads we had for the policy brief, but we also don't. Yeah, we need to kind of ask our colleagues and see, did it have an impact, or ask partners. It's always difficult, especially if many of our authors of policy briefs are postdocs, and if they leave the institute, the knowledge and also the connections might be lost. But I wanted to give you an example where we've seen some impact of a policy brief. So a colleague of mine wrote a policy brief on shrimp aquaculture, sustainable shrimp aquaculture in Indonesia, and he disseminated the policy brief to various recipients. There was also a workshop with the Indonesian embassy in Berlin, and then they sent out an official letter to several Indonesian ministers to inform about the possible improvements for Indonesian shrimp aquaculture based on this study, which has been done at the ZMT. And then later we got knowledge of at least one owner of an aquaculture facility that applied exactly the recommendations from this policy brief. So yeah, that is one example of impact of a policy brief. There's actually also an interesting paper that I found about what is the impact of a policy brief. They found that the impact on the opinion with experts is comparably low, but it can be very high with a layperson. Yet I think it's worthwhile to try, and I think I'll close now and thank you for your attention. These are also my sources. Please take a look at the slides. As far as I know, they will be uploaded, and yeah, I'm here for you if you have any questions. Thanks.
Many thanks, Rebecca, for presenting your work and giving our attendees a nice introduction, but also advices on how to write a policy brief. I'm opening now the Q&A, so please, if you have any questions for Rebecca, send it to us, and we will make sure that you would get an answer on them. I would also like to mention that this webinar is recorded, and we will publish it next week on our YouTube channel, but you can also find it on the EAS website under the membership section. So the first question for you, Rebecca. I thank you for this very nice presentation. Once we have produced the policy brief and the recommendations, what is the procedure to address the policymakers at the EU level to ensure this information is known when they are making new policies or amend existing policies?
Oh, yeah, thanks for the question. I do have to say I haven't been really working on an EU level because we are mainly working with tropical partner countries, but I don't know if someone else would be able to answer this question through a comment, or even Alistair, you're here.
We can wait and see if Alistair is keen to say something on this. The next question for you is, or Alistair, are you able to go in? Okay.
I am, yes. I think the answer to that question would be, as Rebecca said, when you are sourcing the contacts that you want to address, she recommended making a specific mailing list for different people. So the procedure is similar to a regional or a national government. There are plenty of organograms available for the different EU bodies, institutions, the Commission, the Committee of the Regions, the Parliament, with email contacts. So you can find specifically the units or the areas or the specific desks that you want to target. So I think in that way it's the same way as producing that mailing list. It's true as well that there are two processes that you mentioned in your question. The first is making new policies when they're looking for feedback and input from people. So policy briefs have an importance there, and that might be a good case for combining results of several projects or giving a kind of state of the art on a certain aspect of science. And as they make new policy or develop new policies, they themselves have to produce an impact assessment for that policy. So proactively, policy briefs or policy summaries can be a useful input as well and help them to develop their impact assessment for that particular line of policy. And when it comes to amending existing policies, I think for me this is one of the core elements of the recommendations that we might give when we can provide evidence that policies are failing to deliver or are poorly targeted. As long as we have the evidence base in our policy brief, it gives a very good argument to amend current policy for sure. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alistair. The next question for you, Rebecca, is: are there any available software templates that can be used to prepare policy briefs?
You mean like a template for writing a policy brief, like a Word document or so? I'm not sure if there are any open source available, but I'm happy to share our template to anyone who's interested.
Thank you, Rebecca. That will be well appreciated. The next question for you is, in general, how long should a policy brief be, for instance, in a maximum page numbers? Thank you.
I think, again, this really depends on who your target audience is and what their preference is. We try to stick to 4 pages, which I think is a nice, digestible format. But I've seen policy briefs that are 20 pages long, and they're more like a PowerPoint presentation with a lot of bold text and big pictures. So yeah, and I've also seen very long reports that are called policy briefs. Are just a long compilation of text. So my answer would be, I think 2 to 6 pages is perfect.
Thank you, Rebecca. How would you describe a good policy brief, and how do you rate a successful policy brief? Is it an uptake by decision maker or popularity in the community?
I think what the purpose of a policy brief is to inform policymakers and decision makers. So a popularity in the scientific community is maybe not, it's a nice kind of unintended consequence or so, but what you would aim for is really to that someone from policy has read your work. And even if they haven't implemented exactly what you're stating in the policy brief, maybe you will have also some personal benefits to it, that you're being invited to the next round of experts and they listen to your expert opinion, and after that you will have some effect on policy making.
Thank you. We received a comment: our institute and in media department currently paying same amount attention to gender neutral formulations. Is this focus present in whole Europe and needs to be respected also in such short publications?
That's a tricky question. But personally, I think gender neutral for language is very important, and we should all try to change our writing. But I've seen also documents where there are disclaimers that saying, due to the short nature of this document, will not use this kind of language. I hope this is a question.
Thank you, Rebecca. Alistair, would you like to ask a question to Rebecca?
It was just on that last point, actually. We have to be politically correct, especially if we're giving recommendations to policymakers. So there is either the attention that the question related to with media partners paying a lot of attention to this, or alternatively, as you said, making a disclaimer. I was a little bit surprised to read that you put a disclaimer saying this doesn't represent your opinions of the ZMT, because I would imagine that as a policy brief, it actually does represent your opinions. Can you just describe that more? And is that also a way of disclaiming general policy? Is it also a way of making sure that the partners that you have with you, especially, for example, environmental NGOs, are happy? Can you tell us a little bit more about that disclaimer?
Yeah, I think that's you already answered the question quite well. So it's kind of a what's it called, a safety precaution measure, and also I think also to especially also for the leadership of the institute to I mean, though we are engaging also in science diplomacy, I think it's just a precautionary measure that we've taken. Yeah. Otherwise, each of the policy brief also would need to be checked in detail by the leadership and might require some revision.
Thank you, Rebecca. I would also, and thank you, Alistair, as well. I would also like to remind you that you can send your question to Rebecca now, because we are coming to the end of the webinar. If you will have any questions for Rebecca that you don't want to right now, you can email her, and she will be more than happy to give you an answer on them. So, Rebecca, for you, one more time, if a policymakers pay attention to the document, is it common to give feedback or ask the authors for more information, or does the role of the authors end with the public brief publication itself? Policy brief, sorry.
I'm not sure if I understood the question. Could you maybe say? Sorry.
Sure.
I can't read it. I don't have it in the chat.
If a policymaker pays attention to the document, is it common to give feedback or ask the authors for more information, or does the role of the authors end with the public policy brief publication itself?
I would think that depends on if there's already a relationship between, or there's a communication between the authors and the recipients, if I understood correctly.
Maybe I can come in very quickly on that. It's a little bit like the crossover between a policy brief and a press release, because on a press release you're always going to put, for more information or questions you can contact this or this person. I imagine that for a policy brief you might have a contact point, but as you say as well, if you I mean, you mentioned that you were doing kind of at least 5 policy briefs per year. They're going to different audiences, but I guess that people will be relatively used to having input from ZMT on certain issues, and so you will have repeat policy briefs. I think the big question is for people working almost exclusively on the production of science and scientific communications. In some places, the resources and capacities might allow for a specific press office, a specific knowledge transfer area, a policy office, or the policy office of the university or the institute, where the the actual role of the scientific researcher is actually low in terms of policy brief production. But for laypersons not having so much knowledge about that specific area, including people that are writing general policy briefs, then I think the skill level for the scientist to be able to summarize clearly and simply for a policy brief or for a press release is an important skill. Is it something that scientists should all learn, or is it something that we can say we have other departments or other parts of our organization that manage that?
Well, I think it depends. Okay, we have a couple of colleagues who do basic research and they're really not interested, and they're excellent scientists, and they really don't want to or need to involve in science communication. But I mean, if you're interested also in applied research and also engaging in dialogue with policymakers and society, I think it can only be helpful to practice, for example, producing a policy brief and also engaging in a couple of other formats. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not always acknowledged as well as much as writing scientific publications, and it's also hard to track and monitor. But I think it it's also I mean, our responsibility to engage and share. We're being funded by public funds, and so it's our responsibility to give back. And the scientific system really also, yeah, I don't know. We get taught how to communicate with peers and in the community, and sometimes tend to forget how to talk to other recipients, I think.
Great answer, Rebecca. Thank you very much. We are also at the end of the webinar today, so very much thank you again for the great presentation and the great work you presented today. I would like to thank all the attendees for joining us today and participating in this webinar. I will post the recording of this webinar by the end of the week, and you will get all the information in the email. Many thanks once again, and see you on the next webinar. Bye-bye. Thank you, Rebecca.
Bye.